Let's begin with Leda Caldi, who, at the age of 55, served in Senegal beginning in 1993. She would remain there for 3 years.
Tell us about your program.
Well, I was supposed to be helping with small enterprise development. And of course, like most Peace Corps volunteers, I ended up doing almost everything from building latrines to ball courts, helping women in many small enterprises, like setting up little tourist stands, helping them gather millet. I'm on the seashore, okay? It's the Atlantic. And it's a lot of mangrove marshes. It's a big delta. And the women would gather shellfish, and we built together a concrete storehouse for their shellfish and their millet. I helped so many of them to sort of improve their small businesses. And they were just my best friends, and we had wonderful times together.
This is the voice of Phil Yoder, who served in Ecuador from 1988 to 1990.
The Peace Corps sent me to the upper Amazon region of Ecuador to help with growing tilapia in ponds. And at that time, all the idea was to increase the protein intake of the local people by not depending on fish from the rivers, which were being depleted, but by being able to grow fish in ponds. We built fish ponds and stocked them with tilapia and carp. And the idea took off quite well. And after 10 years of Peace Corps initiative, I'm proud to say that some of the farmers I worked with are still in business and provide protein for the local cities.
Marcia Lang was in Guatemala from 1963 to 1965.
Well, we were community development specialists, which meant nothing to us because we had never trained in anything like that before. But we went over there and were told to do whatever we could.
This is Eloise Hanner, who served with her husband in Afghanistan from 1971 to 1973.
Worked at the Ministry of Finance, interestingly, and they had a program for their new young college graduates who had just come into the ministry, that if they could get their English up to a certain level, they would qualify for scholarships for master's degrees in England and Australia.
Wonderful.
So our goal was to try to get their English up to a level for them to pass this test. And we never saw this test, so I don't know how difficult it was, but we just worked on everything from conversation to grammar and had a lot of fun because our students were the same age we were.
Next we have Chuck Johnson.
I was in Ethiopia 3. It was 1964 to 66. It was a highly unusual group because it contained more than 700 volunteers.
700 at one time?
Yes, I think we started in training at UCLA about 750, and about 700 actually went to Ethiopia. So the backstory to that number is that either Sergeant Shriver, the then Peace Corps director, or Dean Rusk, the then Secretary of State, made an agreement with Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, that if Haile Selassie would release all of the contract Pakistani, Indian, and Egyptian secondary school teachers in academic subjects, the Peace Corps would supply of the academic instructors, except for sports, Amharic, which was the language, and morals. And in fact, that is what we did.
Sean Wooden was in country in Kenya from 1995 to 1997.
I was a small business volunteer, which means that I provided consulting for people running businesses or groups managing projects together. So on the one hand, I might meet with people who had tiny little businesses on the side of the street, people sewing, people fixing cars, people banging out pieces of metal to be cooking pots. Or I would also meet with groups of people who came together to pool their money and invest that money in one project. And then they would jointly manage the project. So whether I was meeting with an individual or a group, a lot of the conversation was around how to manage a business, what is a business. When we talk of business, it's more at a very basic level that there's money for the business and there's money for personal means, and we try not to mix them. So that's one of the basic concepts that I spoke about over and over, as well as on a more formal basis, creating a business plan and the elements of going into a business plan.
Up next is Natalie Fernhaven, who served in Afghanistan in the early 1970s.
It took a long time for us to figure out if we could do anything. In the end, the second year, we developed a little clinic that was, a lot of people had tuberculosis, so they developed tuberculin abscesses. And so we just mixed up this soap with water and basically started to cleaning people's sores and wrapping them with cleaner bandages, and finally they began to heal a little bit better. So I got all these bars of soap from a United Nations organization, and that worked out pretty well, but most of the things were just impossible to change. The way they did things made sense to them.
Lauren Evans was in Uganda from 2012 until February 2015.
Actually had a radio show in Uganda called Pillow Talk.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, that was fun. We broadcast from Mbale. We reached all the way to Kenya, and we took questions about people's love lives. And taking questions about love lives in East Africa as a foreigner is a fun time.
I would think that would be a little bit embarrassing.
They tried to. Their cultural sensibilities are a bit different, but that was one of the things we were there doing, is we were kind of challenging that and putting out a different perspective. You know, saying on the radio in East Africa, like, no means no, that might be a new thing for them. And so it's good to help get that out there. And those little things make a big difference.
Barbara Gershberg served in Morocco, Yemen, and Sierra Leone during the 1990s.
My original assignment did not take place. I picked my own, went to my country director, and I said, this is what I want to do, and this is where I want to work. And he said, fine. My site was in Kenny. There was the German TB and leprosy control hospital. And the director was the most phenomenal woman, Antoinette Ferguson. And I had some medical experience, so I said, I want to work for you. And it was run by nuns, an order of sisters from the Philippines. And they said, oh, God sent you to us.
Christine Grovenstein served in Guatemala from 1988 to 1991.
I ended up doing a lot of teaching about nutrition, where they could find easy to find, also inexpensive, good sources of nutrients right within their own community, so that they could improve their ability to feed their children. And it resulted in me doing little Charla's talks on the front porches of the women in these villages, very informal talks. It caused me to have to rethink all my teaching methods and all of what had been my comfort zone of how I taught. You know, I could be on the front porch and all of the neighbors would come to sit and the dogs and the chickens would be walking in and out, and the mothers would be breastfeeding and the children would be playing, and here I was involved in a talk about how to use perhaps something they had never used before, perhaps some grains that they had gotten through USAID care program. You know, and I could say, you can use this bulgur wheat or this cottonseed flour. You can use this to make a wonderful muffin for your children's health. And I would use like an inexpensive tin pan and some tuna fish cans that I had saved, and help them learn to bake over an open fire on the ground.
And now our own Angela Mexicanos describing her service in Guatemala from 1992 to 1995.
My favorite project was working with a group of women, and they were raising sheep. I became great friends with Celestina. I actually got a grant from CARE International. I had to take her to Guatemala City to receive her check. And 40-year-old woman, 8 children, had never been to Guatemala City before. So we got on a bus early in the morning, went out to the city. She was nervous. But we made it to the city, and they gave us a check. She was perplexed as to what to do with the check, so I told her I would deposit it in my checking account in the city and then withdraw it once we got back to our town in the Highlands. She really didn't understand how that all was going to work, but she trusted me. And
that's wonderful.
And it was a great success. But later on, once we built our installations in the town, we had an expert come out and help us shear the sheep, show us how to shear the wool and to card the wool and clean it. And then I brought somebody else in to show them a more efficient way to spin the wool. And then I brought somebody in, another Peace Corps volunteer, to teach them how to knit a sweater.
My goodness. You made good use of all the resources you met.
I tried, but that's why it was my favorite project, because it was from nuts to bolts, from start to finish. It was amazing.
Next, we have Mary Duda, who served from 1966 to 1968 in South India in the state of Madras, which is now called Chennai.
What do you feel were the benefits of your volunteer service in the Peace Corps? How do you think you helped the people?
I think I helped them in two ways. The basic way was the program we were in that they did know how to make a nutritious meal for the children for lunch. And another thing we did with them, which was kind of fun, so to speak, was we built an outdoor oven for them so they would know for how to make an oven at the school. So we left them with that program, plus we left them with what Americans are like. And I think that's important because it seemed like we had a very good relationship with everybody we met over there. And so I think that relationship was very good. For myself, it gave me just much more of a world perspective in that I come from St. Louis, Missouri, and before I went to Peace Corps training, I was in two states in my life, Missouri and Illinois. I had my Peace Corps training at the University of Pennsylvania, so that was my first adventure. And then, we're flying halfway around the world. I knew very little about India except what I had been reading in books and the training that I got. But I really loved it. And I think it was a wonderful experience for me and gave me much more of a world perspective.
Patty Walsh served in Madagascar from 2001 to April of 2002.
I think Peace Corps is incredibly important, not only for my time there, but for exposure to the people that live in country. When I was in the Peace Corps, 9/11 happened, and I am from New York originally, and that's when I felt most far away from home. And part of me wanted to go home right away and be back in America, but part of me also wanted to expose people to Americans and try and encourage them to learn who we are, and not that we're some big mega power or what they think they know of us, but actually show them an individual. So I think it was important that our presence is there just as much as our projects are being completed.
From 1969 to 1971, Karen Reiter served in Turkey as an English teacher.
I think what I left is probably in my most touching story, and that is that around 2 o'clock in the morning one night, there was a knock on my door. I pushed my mosquito netting out of the way, jumped out of bed, grabbed a bathrobe, opened the door, and there were 3 of my tall senior and high school students standing there silently. And I looked at them and said, "What is wrong?" And they asked me if they could come in. I said, of course. I opened my door. They came in. I turned on my one little bare light bulb in my house. And they were standing like soldiers, very stiffly, but one of them was holding something in his hand. I looked at it, he extended his hand to me, and I realized that it was a Turkish flag. And I took it and I said, "Why are you giving me this?" And he said, "Because the Turkish students burned the American flag at the American embassy today. And if you want, you can burn the Turkish flag."
Oh, how touching.
And just telling this gives me goosebumps again. And I put it back into his hands and I said, "I love the American flag. I love the Turkish flag. I would not burn my flag. I would not burn your flag. Please take this back. Don't ever tell anyone about this. And we'll talk about it later privately." I hope I left an enduring face of America.
Evan Long served in Mozambique from